Hello and welcome to the last of our STAAR review. In this lesson, we're going to be going over the modern era. This is probably the era that we are the shakiest on, but bonus, it's the era that next year you will go over the most in AP Government. So, starting, what we are going to begin with is Nixon. So, after Johnson and the turbulent 60s, all the things that are going on, the Vietnam War, people are kind of tired of all the progressive reform and they kind of want things to be calm. So Nixon offers this idea of stability. You know, he was Eisenhower's vice president. He has a lot of policy experience. So he's elected in a pretty big way in 1968. Domestically, he is all about protecting the environment, so the Environmental Protection Agency to reduce air and water pollution, the Endangered Species Act to protect plants and animals, and both these show the federal government's commitment to protecting natural areas and resources for the public good. So kind of going back to that Teddy Roosevelt idea that we need to preserve these things around us. That has a lot to do with the different actions that are happening in the 1960s as far as the environmental movement and things, but this does show the commitment of the federal government. We talked about Nixon's foreign policy, that he's also approaching more of a calm approach to foreign policy, detente with the Soviet Union, where we're having the SALT treaties and the de-escalation of nuclear weapons. And there is this big question of what is exploding all of these nuclear weapons doing to our environment. And so these things are tied. Unfortunately, Nixon is a little bit paranoid, and he definitely feels that he was robbed of this election in 1960. So he wants to ensure that in the election of 1972 that he is going to win this thing, which leads to the Watergate scandal. Nixon's accused of ordering a break-in and cover-up at the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee at the Watergate Hotel. He basically breaks in to steal some records to see how he's doing in comparison to his Democratic opponents, to get some dirt on them. A bunch of people around him are indicted for these crimes, and they figure out that it does go all the way up to the president. And so rather than being impeached and indicted, he resigns from office. The major effect is that this makes Americans not trust their government. We already had some issues as far as the credibility gap goes with the Vietnam War. I mean, all the way back to the Teapot Dome scandal, we've had some issues with the federal government. But this is going to kind of seal the deal. And most Americans are going to tell you after this point they do not trust our federal government. They think that they are probably lying to us. So Nixon resigns. We have Ford for a brief period of time, but people are not fans of Ford because they feel like he did a shady deal in pardoning Nixon because, again, Ford was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. He was not elected by the majority of the people, and so they felt like it was a bit of that corrupt bargaining sort of stuff. So in 1976, in the election, Carter wins, so we have a Democrat back in office, and he's going to turn to more social things at home. And so the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977 helps to put more money into low-income areas. We talked in class about how if you go to North Dallas, there are lots of shopping options, there are lots of food options, but around here, there are not as many. And so it would be better for the community as far as prices, it would be better for the community as far as options, it would be better for the community as far as jobs to have employers come in. However, it's sort of a catch-22. Because there are no other businesses, a business doesn't want to take the risk because it seems like maybe the business would not do well, therefore the business will not come. So this act seeks to basically give companies loans and credit if they move into these areas. The goal is to basically reduce discrimination and to make things better. What we are seeing in this time period is a huge shift from the Rust Belt, the north, the factories, the cars, to the Sun Belt, the south. This is really because of the rise of the military-industrial complex. The better high-paying military jobs are in the South because this is where they have the big land to make places like Texas Instruments, like Raytheon. And so people are seeking these better jobs in the South. The auto industry is not doing so hot, and so better jobs are going to be held in the South. Also, parts of the South that were never habitable because of, the heat and no water are made useful because of water dams and air conditioning. So people are now able to move. So we're going to see a huge increase in population in cities like Dallas and all over the South. In 1977, we also have a pretty big step as far as like foreign affairs when Jimmy Carter invites the leaders of Israel and Egypt to Camp David to work out a peace agreement. There's been tension between Israel and the Arab countries around it since the foundation of Israel. We went into that in class. And there had been no agreement between them. Things were particularly tense after the 7 Days War in the 1960s, and so bringing them together, and even though we said Egypt didn't do much except, acknowledge Israel has a right to exist, it does make a huge point in showing that they could come together. This shows the desire for the United States to create stability in the Middle East. This has a lot to do with oil, but also Israel is one of our very strong allies and our desire to protect them. Question, answer. So, in retaliation for our support of Israel and retaliation for other things that were happening, OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, who are a trust, just like trusts in the Gilded Age, basically increased the price of oil. So they impose a oil embargo on the United States for allying with Israel, which increases our price, causes an energy crisis in the United States. We were incredibly oil dependent this time because if oil is super cheap, why would you invest in expensive solar, hydro, new methods of finding energy? So this is going to make us need to find new ways of making energy and try and reconsider our dependence on foreign energy resources. But today, again, this is still a major problem. This does make people pretty upset with their federal government, and throughout the 70s, the rising price of oil is going to lead to the stagflation and to other issues. The Middle East really becomes a huge problem in the 1970s and will continue to be a problem today. And so we see a shift from these Cold War concerns to more of Middle Eastern concerns. So the Iranian hostage crisis is really the boiling point of this. The Shah of Iran had been an ally of the United States for many years. Many presidents had dealt with them. He is deposed by his people in the late 1970s, and he flees. Many countries will not offer him asylum because he's wanted by his own people to be tried, and but he's dying, and so he needs medical treatment. Carter allows him into the United States for humanitarian purposes, and in retaliation, students seize the embassy of the United States. They hold the embassy staff hostage for 444 days. This makes the United States seem very weak. Carter loses popularity because remember, just not that many years ago, we're the victors of World War I, of World War II. We are the place to be watched. We are the height of power, and now we are basically under the thumb of oil. We seem to be losing economic buying power, and it looks like on a world stage we've not done so hot in the Korean War or the Vietnam War, and now basically anyone can hold our people hostage and we can't do anything about it. So this leads to unpopularity of Carter. Carter loses the next election to Reagan, and the very day that Reagan is elected, January 20th, the hostages will be released. Question, answer. All right, so Reagan. We talked about his foreign policy with this Peace Through Strength, the Strategic Defense Initiative, aka Star Wars, but he really is trying to fix this problem of stagflation. The American economy is suffering because we've reduced spending on the Cold War, which had been what was really pushing the economy out. Remember that it was the start of World War II that pulled us out of that depression when the government was spending so much money. So he has a theory of supply side economics. This is different from the Keynesian economics that Roosevelt had been a fan of. And basically this says is that if you give the suppliers, the businessmen, the factory owners, the tax break, the money, this will increase the supply of goods, which makes things cost less, and also they will hire more people. Next year in economics, he will spend a long time talking about if this works, if this doesn't work, but this is his proposed plan. Also, the degree of business regulation by the federal government decreases. Reagan is a Republican, and he is a Republican who wants to reduce the power of the federal government. And so we're seeing that in his policy. Domestically, also, we have the first female Supreme Court justice in 1981, Sandra Day O'Connor, which is monumental because she's the first woman appointed to the Supreme Court. Through this period, we're seeing the rise of conservatism. This is really growing as a retaliation to what's seen as the excesses of the 1960s, 1970s, and they're trying to get back to these foundational values of American society. So they're reacting to the counterculture movement, the hippie movement, things of this. So the Heritage Foundation, the Moral Majority, the NRA, all represent this rise of conservatism. Their goals are to shrink the size of the federal government, so to get back from those policies of Roosevelt, of LBJ, to promote family values, to lower taxes, stimulate business, increase national defense. So again, I've told you, think of US history as like parents and children. So if your parents were like hippies and you were raised on commune, like you can't do much to rebel against your parents than to become a super conservative person. So we see these sort of shifts, these retaliations, like reacting. It's just like a pendulum. Like we go to one extreme, then another in U.S. history. So like always think of it this way: that if in one era it's one thing, the next era it will probably be different. Phyllis Schlafly is a leader that you need to know for this. She's a female leader of this movement. She's very opposed to the women's rights movement because she thinks that it's going to reduce the rights of wives and actually harm family life. Question, answer. So in 1982, Reagan sends the Marines to suppress the civil war in Lebanon. This is happening because of the addition of Israel. And so all the Palestinian refugees are moving to Lebanon. This is causing lots of conflict. 241 U.S. Marines are killed by a suicide bomber in 1983, which leads to a lot of Americans to question, like, why are we there? Also, we're war weary. We do not want to get into another situation abroad. And so we sort of like back away from this. However, there are like several people are captured in this sort of takeover, which leads to the Iran-Contra affair. So Reagan sells some arms to Israel, who gives them to Iran in order to release the hostages in Lebanon, because as every movie has taught us, we cannot negotiate with terrorists. There's now like this secret money that the executive branch has. They can't really do anything with it, so they use it to fund anti-communist Contra rebels in Nicaragua. The legislative branch had said that we could not do anything to interfere here because, again, we do not want to be involved in other events. Reagan, though, is this like severe anti-communist who does want to curb like communism in Latin America, and so he does fund them and helps them to gain weapons and things of this nature. When this comes to light, the Iran-Contra affair angers a lot of Americans because, like, we had said we don't support terrorism, but then we gave them guns, which they're going to use to attack us. And also, the president has done something that the legislative branch said he can't, which seems like super illegal. So this again causes more Americans to question our government. Question, answer. All right, after Reagan, we have George H.W. Bush. He gets involved in the Persian Gulf War. Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait, which is a sovereign nation. And so the UN forces under the U.S. leadership launch Operation Desert Storm against Iraq. This is just sort of like the same thing that happened in the Korean War, except this time it's very successful. It only lasts a few days. Hussein agrees to remove all Iraqi troops and pay Kuwait for the damages. This is seen as like, after a series of pretty big defeats, a pretty big victory. It's this use of like American military technology to do the bombs over Baghdad, to like do the various things so that we do not have to commit as many troops to the ground. And also, after a string of defeats, this is seen as a pretty big win. So after George H.W. Bush, we have the election of Bill Clinton. The election of 1992 is very interesting because it's a three-way race for one of the first times in U.S. history. Ross Perot becomes one of the most successful third-party candidates right after Teddy Roosevelt, when he ran as a bull moose. Economically, the economy is awesome, mostly, though, because of the rise of the internet, of computer-related things. Everybody's buying all of this new technology, and Americans are the ones that are exporting them all. So we're doing very well. Domestically, Clinton also has some problems. He lies about an affair that he has under oath, so he faces impeachment. However, he just falls short of it. But this really shows how in this age of 24-hour news in this age of all these various things that are happening, cameras everywhere, that elected officials are going to face a lot of scrutiny over their personal lives. Hillary Clinton, in her own right, has had a very intense political career. She's the first female senator of New York, the Secretary of State. She has run and is running for president, and really is a dominant figure in our political system today. Clinton sends troops to the Balkans. There's human rights abuses going on, some genocide. So Clinton orders U.S. forces to Bosnia and Kosovo to help negotiate peace. This is an area that after the breakup of the Soviet Union is facing a lot of internal struggle, a lot of internal strife. And so this really shows the U.S.'s attempts to further the interests of peace in the world. It also is showing that, like, after the Holocaust, we are going to intervene in human rights violations as much as possible because we can't allow these things to happen again. Question, answer. International trade is big in this period, particularly because we have these multinational corporations that are like Walmart that are all over the place. Also, with the rise of the internet, with the rise of this like really intense community, we're going to need to have more trade. So NAFTA, and the North American Free Trade Agreement, has free trade with the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And there's where other things like the GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, that all are about like making trade more equitable, more free between nations. And we can argue if this is good, this is bad, but it is what happened. And next year we will spend our time arguing. So, in the election of 2000 is a very, very close race. George H.W. Bush wins after a recount of votes in Florida was demanded. The Supreme Court intervenes, says, nope, we're just going to go with who we have. And so he enters the presidency on a very shaky footing because some people don't think that he should have been the president. They think that actually Al Gore should have won. So he's very controversial from the start. During his presidency, there are many things that happen. Hurricane Katrina is a national tragedy. Hurricane hits New Orleans. The levee system fails. Massive flooding. It damages our oil and gas industry. It puts one of our major American cities underwater. And to this day, New Orleans is still trying to recover from this. So this is a huge detriment to the United States. Probably the biggest one, though, are the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. This leads to lots of legislation. The Patriot Act and Department of Homeland Security are both created to solve U.S. security concerns. The idea is that in this new era, we're not fighting the same sorts of wars that we were. So it's not like a country is attacking us. It's these secret groups that we need to figure out how to survey and how to figure out to protect ourselves from. Critics of this argue that it deprives us of our constitutional rights, and again, next year we will spend a long time talking about this. But this goes back to this idea that in times of struggle, we always err on the side of like protection rather than the side of like freedom. And so this goes back to the Alien Sedition Acts, the Espionage Act, the Japanese internment, all of these things. This is all part of the global war on terror. We have all of this involvement in the Middle East. We have a war in Afghanistan, a war in Iraq. And both these are basically to combat this global terrorism. We do not want another attack like September 11th, and so we must go to these countries to take out those that would be against us, and also to protect our economic interests in the Middle East. Question, answer. So the election of 2008 is significant because Barack Obama was elected as our first African-American president of the United States. He appoints Sonia Sotomayor to be the first Hispanic justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. During his presidency, we have a financial crisis that had started in 2008 that was very detrimental. There's an economic recession. The housing bubble burst. Companies are going out of business. Massive companies like Ford are going out of business. So Barack Obama passes the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, which gives federal money to the economy to prevent another Great Depression, basically. And so this is called the bailout, TARP, like things of this nature. Again, in government economics, we will talk about this so much more next year. So, technology is the name of the game in the late 20th and 21st century. This has changed our world. Free enterprise system allows us to use our own economic resources to produce goods. There's the buy and selling of everything. You can buy everything online now and have it shipped to you with an Amazon drone in like 10 minutes or something ridiculous. And all these scientific discoveries are really making our society more global and much easier, faster, better. However, there's less privacy. The NSA documents, Snowden, things like that tell us this. Also, there's outsourcing of labor and other things that we could argue negatively impact our communities. Bill Gates, know him. I feel like you do, but in case you've been under a rock, computer guy. Energy is the name of the game in the 21st century. We need to find a new sustainable form of energy and wean ourselves off of our dependence on oil. So it's going to be really trying to find these solar, these other methods that will help us out in the future. And so the person who solves this energy crisis will be, a millionaire. So y'all go out and do that, and then, thank me in your acceptance speech of, your prize. All right, so major themes. We become way more involved in the Middle East. We have more international trade, more globalization. Technology makes our lives way easier, but way less private. Also, we need new energy, so go find that stuff. Okay, primary source versus secondary source. You got to know these. I hope you knew these already. Know your directions. Also, know your presidents. I'm actually going to do another PowerPoint all over this, but this has been in the back of the room, and we've been adding to it like every day for a month, so you should know these things. Okay, STAAR. STAAR, STAAR, STAAR. You got to read everything carefully. You have more time than y'all are going to need because you are so used to having like a million years or like super short time, right, with the AP test. So you're going to feel like you have a million years on this. But you're going to read carefully. You're going to take at least 2 hours. And you are way too smart to get taught in the STAAR traps, which are the ones where it seems like the right answer, but there's a way better answer there. So you're going to think through. All of you have the capability of getting this commended. All of you have a capability. You have the words in your head to not miss a single question. So think it through and do this thing. Y'all are going to do amazingly. Just come talk to me after school if you have questions about it. Review these videos. I'm going to do a couple more about vocabulary and going over the presidents, and then I'm going to switch to AP. So make sure that you're good for STAAR and then focus on that AP because you forgot all the early stuff. I will talk to you later.